Welcome to Let's Talk Climate. I'm Jennifer Giordano, and today is the second part of our three-part series, You Can Do This, Replicable Models for Local Climate Action. We're featuring American Climate Leadership Award runner-up GreenRoots. Roseann Bongiovanni is the executive director of GreenRoots. Welcome, Roseann.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I'm so pleased and honored to be here today.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you here today. GreenRoots is doing important work co-convening Massachusetts Environmental Justice Roundtable, which came together to move forward legislative and policy priorities to advance environmental justice and civil rights. I'd like to learn more about you and GreenRoots' mission. But my first question is about you and your background. Why climate activism and environmental justice?
Yeah, I guess I would say, I didn't necessarily choose to go into this field. It sort of chose me. I'm a lifelong Chelsea resident, and I was 18 years old when I started in this work. I had just graduated from Chelsea High School and was about to start my freshman year at Boston University. And if you're familiar with the Boston and Massachusetts area, you'll know that Chelsea and Boston University are probably 3 or 4 miles apart. But at that time, it felt like I was going, overseas. It just felt so far, and I wanted to be connected to community. And so I applied for a community organizing position that was then with the Chelsea Green Space and Recreation Committee. And I didn't even know what community organizing was, but I got the job, and I was working part-time while I was going to school undergrad. And some of our first roles were, or my first duties was really to go out and make sure that the city was living up to its commitment to give back open space that it had taken for the development of new parks and open spaces. And our city was in dire straits at that point. We were in state receivership. Our schools had been shut down. And so we were the first city in the state of Massachusetts since the Great Depression to be taken under state receivership. And so in those early days, they were like, we really need to build new schools. And where else to build new schools in an inexpensive way? Let's build them on Chelsea's parks. And so it was at that point that I started to realize, oh, Chelsea has a significant lack of open space. And yet we're surrounded by water on 3 sides, and we don't have access to that water. We have all of this industry that's dominating our waterfront. Why is that? And it became evidently clear to us at that time that this was really about structural racism and oppression. It was really about environmental justice and environmental racism. And so what I learned in those early days of organizing as an 18-year-old have stuck with me and really have become a lifetime commitment to environmental justice. 27 years later, we have made some amazing accomplishments that we're so proud of, but yet there's still so much work to be done in Chelsea and East Boston and other environmental justice communities.
You've achieved a great deal through your important work. Please tell us about GreenRoots' mission and what are some of your results, say, from the last year?
Yeah, so GreenRoots' mission, is really to engage and empower the most impacted residents, those folks who are most impacted by climate injustice and environmental injustice and environmental racism, empower them to be outspoken, powerful leaders and to implement innovative campaigns to improve our public health and our quality of life here in Chelsea and in neighboring East Boston. I think, some of the things that we are most excited about and most proud about over the last few years is that some of our food justice work has been really incredibly powerful. So we manage 5 community growing spaces, and those community growing spaces were critically important during COVID. Our urban farm was providing weekly distributions of food to the pop-up food pantries here in Chelsea that was significantly hit by COVID-19. And so we were helping 60 to 75 families every single week have access to fresh vegetables to augment, the boxes of food that they were getting from these pop-up pantries. And all of that work is so critically important that we were recently selected for a large grant from Massachusetts General Brigham to create Chelsea's first teaching kitchen. And so we're in the design stage of creating this amazing teaching kitchen where folks will be able to grow at our urban farm, bring those fruit, vegetables, herbs over to the kitchen and learn how to make nutritious meals with them and hopefully to reduce the chronic illnesses and diseases that really plague our community. So that's one of our really exciting accomplishments. We're also pretty proud that we're proposing a community-owned microgrid, and that, it's sort of like a wonky subject, but really it's essentially taking ourselves off of the dependence of the utility grid, right? And trying to produce more resilient, renewable energy. And, as we see all of these, significant heat waves and the more common, devastating weather patterns, that we're so reliant on the utility grid, and yet it's so it's at risk. It's significantly at risk. And so we're proposing a community-owned microgrid that would be renewable, resilient energy that can disconnect from the grid during these major storms, so that if all of Chelsea's power was out, our microgrid would be operating in that facility. Those facilities would have power for emergency situations. And we feel like that's critically important during climate. And I'll just say one last thing that we're really excited about is our heat island work that we're doing in Chelsea. We've identified one block where we're implementing a pilot project and hoping that that pilot project will be really successful, and we can replicate that throughout other neighborhoods in our city and then other cities throughout the region, and then we can share those models nationwide. And that's really engaging folks to transform vacant city lots into new lush green spaces, planting dozens of street trees, implementing white roofs and reflective paint and other measures to really reduce the impacts of heat island, and also improve quality of life and bring community members together.
Wonderful. Those are some really amazing grassroots projects that can have an immediate positive impact. What are some of GreenRoots' biggest projects right now?
I think as we look forward, it seems like we're making great progress on all of these fronts, right? But there's still so much work to be done, as I mentioned earlier. I think as we continue to make the Chelsea Creek waterfront more accessible and cleaner and healthier, it's also making it much more attractive to outside developers who are looking to purchase property along the waterfront and create luxury condos, if you will, and block access for the folks who've been working so hard to access that waterfront. And so that's one of our biggest challenges, is really creating meaningful public access to our formerly industrial waterfront, and making sure that access is there in perpetuity, and that folks who are leading these fights aren't being displaced, right, by all of those luxury developments. Displacement is a big concept that we're very concerned with these days, especially as, again, Chelsea was hit so hard by COVID. We had 6 times the state of Massachusetts rates. We were really the epicenter of COVID infections in Massachusetts for months on end. In 2020, we were on the news for all kinds of devastating impacts from COVID. And one of those that continues to ripple through our community is displacement, right? That folks have lost jobs, they've lost wages. It's been an incredibly challenging time for folks, and yet housing costs, especially in the Boston area, continue to skyrocket. And so as we see these housing costs skyrocket in our proximity to Boston, it means that folks are much more likely to be displaced from the neighborhoods that they've called home for quite some time. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we're working on to combat that is we've just recently launched the very first community land trust in Chelsea. It's called Comunidades Enraizadas, and it's led by mostly immigrant women who have said, we've seen this work in Central America. We're going to put this in play in Chelsea. We're going to take land off of the speculative market. We're going to put it back into community control and make sure that community members have a say in what's happening in their neighborhoods. And I'm really excited about that work. Is it easy? Absolutely not. Super challenging, but the end results, I think, are amazing. And I'm really excited about that. And I'll just say one last thing that I'm really looking forward to is I've just recently been in conversations with the US EPA about looking at a cumulative impact analysis on Chelsea. So as we've been advocating to the EPA and other enforcement agencies for years and years, we've said, you can't just look singularly at one industry or one polluting source. You need to look at the impact of all of these industries. There are so many industries in the Chelsea and East Boston area. We store 100% of the region's jet fuel. I'm sorry, 100% of the jet fuel that's used at Logan International Airport on our waterfront. 80% of the region's heating fuel. 70% of the Northeast region's gasoline is stored in tanks along the Chelsea Creek. We have the second largest privately owned produce distribution center in Chelsea. So all of these industries really are providing great regional benefit, but all of the impacts are on low-income communities and communities of color in the same neighborhoods over and over. And so we're really excited that the EPA has finally said, oh, we understand cumulative impacts, and we should be looking at your whole city and all of the impacts, not just single, sources of pollution. And so I feel like that's moving the needle for the EPA and also for the nation, for other environmental justice communities that are facing similar threats. So if we can get the EPA to really hone in on this model, I think it will help other environmental justice communities to continue to advocate and advance, the notion that we need to look at the cumulative impacts of all of this toxic pollution on our health and well-being. We can't continue to be sacrificial grounds for industry's benefit.
Exactly. That's great. Last question here. What is an action that our listeners can take today to contribute to climate solutions?
Yeah, so I think as folks are looking out there and they're hearing about climate more and more commonplace, that it does feel so onerous, right? Like, what can I do? I can't make a huge difference in climate. And I would say it all starts at the grassroots, right? Get involved in a local organization, sign up to be a member, donate to an organization, follow them on social media. When they send out action alerts, call the governor, tell him to stop such and such proposal. Actually make that call. Don't just look at it and say, oh, that's a cool campaign. Make the call to the governor, right? Follow through with those action alerts. You can, if you're in the Massachusetts area, check us out, GreenRoots. We have a number of other organizational allied partners who are amazing, like Alternatives for Community and Environment, Chinatown Progressive Association, Neighbor to Neighbor. There are dozens. And if you're not in the Massachusetts area and you're looking for other organizations to support, check out the Climate Justice Alliance. And that alliance really has organizations throughout the nation that you can get involved in, that you can support, and that will have actions that will help you feel like you're making a real tangible difference in climate change.
Fabulous. All great. And I'll add that ecoAmerica's climate ambassador training, I'll add that to the show notes, and that's where people can learn about acting on climate change solutions. Thank you so much, Roseann, for being with us today to share more about your background and update us on GreenRoots' work. We are so grateful for your contributions.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the recognition from ecoAmerica. We're really so excited about that award.
Oh, absolutely. Everyone, please engage with us online with the hashtag Let's Talk Climate, and follow us on social channels for the latest thought leadership, resources, and episodes on climate action and advocacy. You can join us in 2 weeks for our next episode, Environmental Justice, Youth in Action. And please join us next month for the third part in the series, where we talk with Nancy Metzer-Carter from Schools for Climate Action. See you then.